Good afternoon or good evening, and welcome to the last session of the day, which I hope will be an inspiring end to what I hope you found to be a wonderfully engaging and thought-provoking event so far. The strength of our food safety systems relies not just on regulations and technology, but on the resilience of communities across the entire food chain. This session will explore the crucial role of community engagement in building robust, equitable food safety practices. We're going to look at how fostering a sense of community and food safety transcends the traditional business-oriented network approach, emphasizing the social aspects that are vital for sustainable change. We'll be exploring how resilient food safety communities contribute to the broader goals of human, animal, and environmental health, and present case studies that demonstrate the power of community-driven initiatives in addressing food safety challenges, particularly in resource-limited settings. We've got two fantastic speakers for this afternoon session. Our first speaker today is Professor Lisa Corsten. Professor Corsten is the president of the African Academy of Sciences and a member of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Group of GFSI. She's also part of the FAO WHO GEMRA Technical Expert Group, developing food safety guidance documents such as with leafy greens and irrigation water. Professor Corsten is Professor of Plant Health and Food Safety at the University of Pretoria and the co-director of the Department of Science and Innovation Centre of Excellence in Food Safety. She's attracted extensive national and international long-term funding for research projects and has addressed the South African Parliament on food safety challenges. And this afternoon, Professor Corsten will examine how African communities have developed resilient food safety practices despite resource limitations, drawing from specific case studies across the continent that demonstrate successful community-based approaches to food safety management and a One Health approach. Lisa will also discuss the role of scientific institutions in supporting and strengthening community-led food safety initiatives, including how the African Academy of Sciences has helped bridge the gap between formal scientific knowledge and community practices. And our second speaker is Professor Lucia Annelich. Professor Annelich is the founder of Annelich Consulting, a successful national and international food safety consulting and training business. Prior to this, she worked for the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, where she established a food safety body for the food industry, a first for the country. And this work built on her 25 years as the head of biotechnology and food technology at Tshwane University of Technology, a pioneering role as the first woman to head up such an academic department in South Africa. And Professor Annelich will analyse the critical role of informal food sectors such as street vendors and local economies, including their traditional knowledge and current food safety practices in different African contexts. She'll present innovative approaches to improving food safety among street vendors through community-based training programs and peer-to-peer learning networks, rather than purely regulatory approaches. And she will speak to learnings in South Africa, which could serve as a model for other middle and low-income countries. So I'm going to hand over to Professor Corsten. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lucia and I will be standing between you and a glass of wine.
Yeah.
But before you can get the glass of wine, I need to take you into resilient food safety systems in the African continent. And I want to give you a little bit of a perspective. In fact, my task was very clearly focus on African communities and specifically the impact of resource limitations. Now, if I say resource limitations, that means not only access to information, but the infrastructure to not only determine what is the food safety status of our production and food safety system, but to address that. And then secondly, I need to give you some experiences and reflections on a few case studies on how we actually are mapping the food safety status of the African continent. But let me first ask you, I'm not sure if any of you have ever done a food culture tour in the African continent, but it is rich in dynamic food that is totally unexplored. What's also interesting about the African continent, it has the land. we can in fact produce enough food for the world. We have the youth, we have the biggest population of young people under 30, which indicates the future and what is to come. And I think all of you know that we can actually fit America, Mr. Trump won't like this, and China and Europe into Africa, just to give you a bit of a perspective of the continent. But that's the one part of the picture. The other part is the continent, the African continent, is the most food insecure in the world. Despite its resources, despite its human capacity. And the only country that's really food secure is South Africa, but it's only food secure at a national level and not at a home level, which tells you that it's an unequal society, an unequal system. Now, add to that fragile system all the disruptions, climate change, wars, and we have many examples at the moment, and emerging diseases. The next very important picture to paint is going beyond the food security index to the food safety index. In fact, I want to challenge GFSI to actually launch a food safety index study for the world, because the current one is mainly quality and safety. But what you can once again see is the fragile food safety status of the continent. So the lighter part is the least food safety compliant, using those index parameters. And just so, by the way, Ireland is the second most food safe country in the world, which is great. So, and South Africa is lying around 59th, just to give you a kind of a perspective of what we have. What we also have, and that's very important, is the forgotten foods or indigenous foods in our continent that should be explored and should be capitalized and developed for the future. Now, let me take a step back in terms of fresh produce supply chains. We have a very formal commercial chain and a very informal chain, which reflects in equal system we have. And if I go and map the food safety compliance in those chains, you can see the formal chain is highly regulated with effective cold chain management systems. Compared to the informal system, we have an unregulated system, no waste removal, no ablution, no adequate potable water. And yet, the world's biggest outbreak, listeriosis, happened in South Africa from the formal sector. And that was in 2017. And what happened recently in 2024? We had the worst scenario of informal food being sold to the poorest of poor with the deaths of children because of chemical contamination of the poor. And the final solution was, yes, we have poor waste management, we need to regulate this sector, and yes, we're going to close some of the shops. So that's the perspective of the scenario on the African continent. But let's just take one step back in terms of research and development. So here we have a resilient system, and if we pull it back into One Health, we get more or less the same. We have a lack of knowledge and scientific information in the continent, and we rely on information, the yellow sites, China and America, to develop policies and regulations in the African continent. And if you go and map 250,000 scientific publications, you can very clearly see the lack of food safety knowledge and publications and systems within the bigger One Health spectrum. And that leaves a very important point. So I'm going to use two examples for you. And the one is research work that we've done in our laboratories, following the whole food system, working with small-scale farmers, looking at the quality of the irrigation water, the safety of the crops, all the way into the markets, and trying to link that from a scientific perspective with the safe food system, comparing the formal and the informal sector. And of course, it's quite nice. We can use tools such as whole genome sequencing, and it's also nice to publish papers for our students. But what is interesting is that we could link with scientists in other African countries, and we could now, for the first time, get information of what's happening on the ground. What is the quality of the water in the whole food system in different sections of the African continent? And this is very important because it provides that background and the scientific information that we need to improve the resilience of food safety within our society. Now, I want to end, and my last task was just to compare scientific institutions and the different stakeholders in the African continent. And I want to show the complexity of this. So here we have 4 groups. At the top, and it's a top-down, bottom-up, at the top you have your scientific community, and they are publishing review papers. And then on the one side, you have the industry with their voluntary standards and the retailers, the GFSI, and that's why we're sitting here today. And then on the other side, you have your more regulatory arm with your ISO standard development, codex, going into your regulation. But right at the bottom, you have the people with the indigenous knowledge, and nobody's capturing it. And those 4 sections are not, in fact, even talking to each other. So let me unzip that just to show you the complexity of these bubbles and to put it on the table that we need to integrate, because that will provide the solutions for a sustainable food safety system. So on the one side, you have your classic WHO, FAO, with their technical experts, GEMRA, that then develop guidance documents for food safety. And in this case, I was sitting on one of those panels, and we developed a food safety guidance document for irrigated vegetables. That document then goes to Codex, and after many years, it finally gets adopted at the regulatory level in the country. That process is totally isolated from what scientists are doing at the top. So your scientific community is not integrated into all of this. And then on the other side of the bubble, we have GFSI, and now they have their own STAG committee, scientific experts, and fortunately, I'm also a member of that. So for the first time, I could see the difference between these bubbles not interacting with each other. And I realized how important it is that we need to link all of this. And then, of course, you have your ISO standards on their own, and all of them are feeding food safety guidance documents. And at the bottom is indigenous populations and communities that have to implement this. And I think it's critical for us going forward to integrate this. I finally want to say that the future is about strategic partnerships such as these, where we link the best scientific expertise globally. We use AI technology in food safety, not only for training and access to information, but to capture that indigenous knowledge and to integrate these knowledge packages. And finally, there's hope. But as Lucia said, it has yet to be implemented. South Africa now has, or Africa has now declared they will create a food safety agency, and we are now busy with these food safety data hubs, rapid alert systems, etc., etc. And finally, there is hope for the future. There's the UN Summit for the Future. In September 42, they had 7 themes identified. In November 24, they actually identified the Pact for the Future. And this year in Seville, the Financing for Development conference will happen. And that's where GFSI can step up and make an impact and contribute to the future. So my final slide is a call for action that we support and create research networks of excellence to ensure a more resilient, safe food system for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I now want to invite my colleague, and I'm just taking over the chair.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. As Lisa said, we stand between you and the cocktail. So let me get stuck in. My role here today is really to talk to you about the South African story, tell you a little bit about the South African story, which will hopefully give some hope and some guidance perhaps and some lessons learned for other parts of the developing, whether it's a least developed country, a low developing country, or even a middle economy. Because we have some exciting things happening, which I would like to talk to you about. So I'm going to talk to you about the informal food sector in South Africa, not the formal, which we have, and it's a fantastic sector. I mean, the Pick n Pays of this world have got glorious stores, and if you walk into those stores, and the Woolworths, which is the equivalent to Marks and Spencer in the UK, our Woolworths is the equivalent of M&S. You walk into these stores and you would think you're in a developed country because they are clean, they're tidy, the variety of food is amazing. They all have food safety system requirements in place before you can stock on their shelves, etc., etc. So that's all in place. But I'm going to talk to you about the informal food sector. And then I'm going to switch over to what we call in South Africa the township economy. And then talk to you a little bit about street vending and food safety and research that I was involved with as well. And then the way forward and the kinds of initiatives we are looking at to elevate food safety in the country, which will hopefully also serve as a beacon for the rest of the continent. What I'm not going to talk to you about is this horrific incident that happened last year in 2024, where we lost around 23 children in the informal sector. They went to buy snacks at what we call spaza shops, and I'll talk to you a little bit about those spaza shops, where illegally accessed and illegally used pesticides were used to kill rats in the environment. And turbufos was the organophosphate that was identified. And we know now, well, I know now, that it is coming in from our very porous borders, specifically Zimbabwe. And I will tell you a little bit more about that later. So these are these granules that come in, and what we also discovered is that a lot of the snacks are produced illegally. They put them on the floor, and then where they've spread these granules of turbufos to kill the rats, those granules have actually gotten into those snack packets that they repack. Children bought these, and within half an hour, they were vomiting, and within an hour, they were dead because they just simply couldn't get to the hospitals in time. And even if they did, the damage to the whole nervous system had already started, and you cannot reverse it. There is a point where you can provide atropine, but when it comes to this point of non-reversal, the child dies. So it's been a very, very bad incident. But what I'm going to talk about is the normal day-to-day business in the informal sector, and not these kind of horrific incidents that do happen from time to time. So how do we actually define the informal sector? Well, it's a number of things. First of all, of course, the street food vending that we all know about, where the ladies or gentlemen, but mainly ladies, are serving, cooking, buying food, cooking it on the streets, and then selling it to their customers. And the situations don't always look very good, not very hygienic at all. Then we have what I called earlier on the spaza shops. These are little stores. They can be in containers. They can be little brick buildings. They are not regulated at all. And there are small neighborhood stores that serve snacks and biscuits and things like that that they keep in these stores. And there are around 200,000 spaza shops in South Africa that have been documented so far. Maybe more, but these are the ones we know of. Then we talk about the bakkie traders, because the bakkie is a word that we use in South Africa to mean a pickup truck. And these guys go to the typically produce markets, fresh produce markets, buy a whole lot of goods, take them on the back of their pickups and go and park somewhere, and then have them available, cabbages and tomatoes, typically what the local population would eat. Cabbages is a very big vegetable that is used, and it's also quite cheap. And so these are the kind of vendors that do this kind of work, and a lot of them make a good living out of that. And then we've got the typical street hawkers that will come and sell a banana or an apple on the street corner in a suburb anywhere. And those are the types of informal sectors that we are talking about. When we come to the township economy, we talk about, we specifically call it Kazinomics. That's a very sort of local language term. And it is a significant contributor to the South African food system. Around 40% of all food sold in South Africa is through the so-called township economy. There are millions of people that live in these townships, and this is a legacy of apartheid, where we had many people pushed into areas where they were forced to live separately from the rest of the white population. And so these townships were sort of frowned upon. But now we've realized that these townships should be encouraged to do better because they provide food to millions of people who come home every night, simply don't have the time to cook, and so they buy food off the streets that has been cooked and provided by these vendors. They contribute around 500 to 900 billion South African rands to our GDP. Translated into USD, it's around 28 to 50 billion dollars per annum. This is significant in our economy. And so that's why there is this turnaround to support these groups to get better and to be able to also provide food that can go to the formal retail system in South Africa. And they provide 2.5 million jobs. And sometimes it's one individual, like a woman who's doing a vending at some point. She provides livelihoods for her entire family. And not only for her direct family, but very often for her son or daughter's children, and the brother that can't work, doesn't have a job, or the sister-in-law or whatever. So it's very, very often an extended family, not just a direct one. And 60% of the demand at the Johannesburg Fresh Produce Market, which is the largest fresh produce market in the world, we handle 1 million tons of fruit and veg that go through that market in Johannesburg. 60% of the demand comes from this informal slash township sector. So again, very specific. And this Johannesburg Fresh Produce Market does have specific hygiene and good agricultural practice requirements in place to be able to even bring the farmers that can bring their produce to this market. So there is this system in place. So all of these products that these bucket traders and so on are buying are coming from these formal markets, and they take it into the informal sector. So therein lies a very good food safety system already in place, which is very different to the rest of Africa. And the Johannesburg Fresh Produce Market provides an access point or a market access point to around 5,000 farmers from the northern parts of South Africa. So as Tsakani, who is a street trader who was interviewed a little while ago in Tshwane, which is the fancy name for Pretoria, said, this table, her table with her food that she was selling, never undermine it, because it takes a lot of children to school. And that just resonated with me and stuck with me, because this is the kind of thing that these women do. They are very strong, and they should be empowered to continue doing this fantastic work that they do. But yes, of course, we have food safety challenges. There's a difficulty in regulating this sector, because there are thousands, as you saw, 200,000 spaza shops. They should all have what we call a certificate of acceptability, which is your basic requirements for food hygiene. And unfortunately, they don't. And that's also partly because we don't have enough environmental health practitioners, which is a fancy name for food inspectors in South Africa. We just don't have enough to get around. So they focus typically more on the formal sector rather than on the informal sector. And so there is a lot of dialogue around changing this and at least registering these spaza shops and getting them to comply with this basic food safety requirement. Food safety education and awareness of the traders and the vendors has to be stepped up. It's not where it should be, not even close. It needs to be stepped up, but we must also educate the consumers, because the consumers of these foods coming out of the townships know very, very little, if anything, about food safety per se. Basic hygiene, yes, but the sort of elevated level of food safety, they don't. And the most unfortunate thing is they get mixed messages from our different government departments. We have a very fragmented food control system in South Africa. We've got 3 regulators that regulate food. They don't necessarily talk to each other, they don't communicate, and they develop regulations in isolation. And sometimes these regulations clash actually quite significantly. And recently, with this pesticide problem, we had one of our regulators going into these townships and removing all snacks and biscuits and any shelf-stable products that had a best before date that was expired, and saying, this is a food safety risk. And we all know that that's not the case. So it was really difficult to try and get through to those departments and say to them, you're doing the wrong thing, you're barking up the wrong tree here. But that's the kind of thing we have, and these mixed messages confuse consumers completely. But we must also never, ever think of an empty barrel syndrome when it comes to food safety in the street vending situation. And this is the research I want to talk to you about. Vendors, mostly women, have an innate sense of cleanliness and hygiene. And that's because typically women are caregivers. So they know that they have to bathe the children. They know they have to wash a fruit before they eat it. They know these basics of hygiene. And they bring that basic knowledge to their street vending situation. Even though the environment doesn't look good, there might be waste that's not picked up, and the roof and some parts of the shack might be falling apart. But innately, they do try and do what they can to make sure the food is actually well cooked, and I'm talking about cooked food here, is cooked and kept long enough so that people can actually consume it and then go home. And the interesting thing here is because we have so many stores in South Africa close to these street vendors, they can actually go to the store, the supermarket, buy the chicken and the meat raw for the day, and they know their customers. They know how much to buy. And they will buy enough, they'll take it to their stall, they'll cook it immediately, they keep it actually hot so that the customers come, they eat their warm food, hot food, and when it's sold, they pack up and go home. And it's usually around 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They know that they're not going to buy more raw food, come back and cook and sit with a whole lot of leftovers that they can't sell. They know their customers. And the work that we did found that about only 2% had leftovers. And this is a survey of 400 street vendors and 800 consumers of those street vendors that we questioned and asked and had a long questionnaire. We also observed what they did. It wasn't just a question of, do you wash your hands before you handle the food? Of course, they're going to say yes. But we would then observe to see if they actually did that. So this was the work that was done. And those that had the few leftovers, they actually took them home and consumed them. They wouldn't bring them back the next day, partly because transportation is a problem. They go home by bus, or they go home by taxi, and they have long distances that they travel. They cannot go home with bags of food, of leftovers that they take with them and then bring back the next day. The foods are kept hot. We did temperature measurement of the foods. Very, very few were below 60 degrees Celsius. They had access to municipal water, which is a good one because municipal water is chlorinated and it's clean, it's potable. And they also had access to public toilets. So this is the infrastructure in South Africa, which I cannot say is the same for other African countries, that supports already from a basic hygiene level these street vendors. And then the trends and way forward is what I want to finish with. The township food entrepreneurs are on the increase. And this is a good thing because this is exactly what we want. Those that are producing their own products, manufacturing jams, yogurts, chocolate milks, those kind of products, they are supported by our food inspectors that help them to comply with the appropriate basic legislation that they have to have in place to be able to produce these kinds of foods. If they wish to stock those products on retailer shelves, they have to then comply with the retailer food safety and hygiene requirements. And many of these retailers have teams that assist them, food scientists, food technologists, that assist them in implementing those food safety and hygiene requirements that the retailers have in place, even at a basic level as a start, and then moving up to hopefully become accredited or certified to one of the GFSI benchmarked standards. And there are some fantastic stories around that too. This greatly, altogether, elevates the knowledge and understanding on food safety in these communities, and this is an ongoing process. So much so that in the last 3 years, there is now an expo for the township economies. And the next one will be held in the Sandton Convention Centre, which is a very fancy centre in the middle of Johannesburg, on the 15th and 16th of July this year, where these entrepreneurs bring their goods. It's not only food, it's arts and crafts and all sorts of other things, in the hope that they can showcase what they're doing and attract corporate businesses to invest with them and to bring them up to speed and help them to generate a good business and to build a good business so that these people can also generate good incomes and become part of the growing middle class economy in South Africa. The banks are coming on board, thank goodness. The Rand Merchant Bank is one of the largest private banks in South Africa. They have even said that they are exploring opportunities in the informal economy because one of the barriers has been access to finance for these businesses. They cannot borrow money from banks because they have no credibility. They have nothing to offer. They don't have collateral. So now these banks are starting to understand that it's a booming market, rich in opportunity, and they need to come to the party as well. And they are saying that this is a thriving economy of a size and significance that has been underestimated. That was only 2 years ago. Or 3 years ago now that we're in 2025. And so we're in this process of understanding more about this township economy and growing it. So much so that there is a South Africa Informal Traders Alliance. And the idea here is even though they are actually there to discuss and negotiate with government the importance of these businesses, it's not from a food safety angle. But we already have the structure. So the idea would be, let's take these guys, let's walk with them and include a food safety mandate with these organizations so that they can start in helping and educating these vendors with regards to hygiene and food safety. And then lastly, I run a food safety summit every year. Under my business. We're running it again this year, 3rd or 4th of June in Johannesburg. And on day 2, there will be an entire session on the township food economy and food safety. And we're going to explore how we can develop a problem-solving methodology. I have a number of IT experts that are coming in as well that are interested in working with us to see how we can take this idea of food safety in the townships forward and elevate this whole system to be far more relevant, if you like, in the South African food economy. And I was hoping to also unveil another very exciting initiative on leadership in food safety that I'm working on. Unfortunately, I cannot. It's not mature enough to tell you about it. But there is, I have already launched a training course last year on leadership in food safety because we've realized that, and I mean, the previous session was full of it, that we were talking about how important leadership is. And there's also talk, as I've seen on LinkedIn, that maybe CEOs should be trained in food safety and not only all the economics and everything else that they are involved with. But that might be actually something to think about. And so the idea here with this leadership in food safety is to take it to the level of the CEO in the business and say, right, how do we engage with you? How do we make sure that there is this interest at high level that can come down and then, of course, work into the food safety culture direction? Because all of this makes perfect sense. And so this is the exciting initiative which I hope to unveil at the summit later this year. And with that, I'm out of time, so thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. So, wow, we've had an incredible 2 presentations covering an enormous amount of ground, ladies, from the massive context, if you like, that is Africa and the opportunity that is Africa, the scale, and indeed the sophistication and the science that's there, all the way down then to the street and some of the challenges on the street and how you engage communities. And I was really reflecting as you were talking, particularly Lucia, the last part there around this inherent food safety culture that exists in many of these vendors, and how do you actually kind of leverage that? But as we think about this food safety system or this food system across Africa and the scientific as well as the kind of human elements to it, what do you see as the biggest barriers to building or sustaining this kind of resilient food safety system? In different contexts, because you've both covered really quite different contexts. And what do you think should be prioritized? Because there's probably a whole pile of barriers, but it would be really interesting for each of you to talk about what you see as the barriers, but what you'd prioritize in trying to overcome them. So maybe Lisa first.
First of all, we have a fragmented governance system in the continent. And, first of all, we speak different languages, we have vast distances to cover, so there's no uniform system that you can apply. So even if we develop a food safety agency and a food safety framework, we will always have to take into account the unique situation in these different communities, from desert populations, migrating populations to urban and rural. So they are also extremely resource limited. They do not have access, and that's the whole continent. And you have intense urbanization with huge informal settlements rapidly growing without access to the infrastructure, such as basics, potable water, waste removal, basic toilet facilities. They just don't have it. They don't have refrigeration systems. So we have to think differently, and we have to bring all the stakeholders to the table, all the role players, and we have to create these networks of support systems to not only develop new knowledge, but to share existing knowledge and to integrate these different food safety frameworks that we have in the continent. We need better governance, and we most certainly need a more effective training at all levels in our whole community.
We'll probably come back to that last point in a minute. And from your side, Lucia?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things is how do we practically, I mean, we talk about these things almost glibly. We need this, we need that. But how do we actually make it happen practically? Because when the rubber hits the road is when things actually happen. It's not about talking about it any longer. I think we've talked long enough about it. But now it's about how do we find the solutions and how do we implement those solutions to be able to make a significant difference that is tangible and that is measurable in these communities. And that is why one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, is trying to seek, it's getting everybody together, and we're going to have regulators, industry, IT people, leadership, etc., together from different sectors to have this discussion, which we don't have in South Africa. So hopefully this will unpack some of these issues so that we can actually come up with a tangible plan going forward to say this is what we need to do, and we can drive it as civil society to make sure that the change actually happens, even if it's starting small. But we start small, we get bigger as we go along, as we have the successes. And I think that's key. I think what we've done before is trying to say, oh, well, we've got a fragmented system. Let's have a single food safety authority. Well, we've been talking about that. How many years? 1999 is the first time I spoke about a single food safety authority in South Africa. We still don't have it. We probably won't have it. So we have to understand what we have and work within that confinement and take those small steps.
Yeah, and I think that really resonates. I was at a couple of the sessions earlier, and this talk of kind of proof of concept, and getting something off the ground and then kind of building on it. It was in an industrial context, but I think the same kind of applies here. It sounds like you have a lot of the science, you have a coalition of the willing, and it's about moving on in that regard.
And if I may just add another point, I think we've also gotten to the stage where we've realized we need to have those stakeholders on board. Again, that concept of the empty barrel. There is no empty barrel syndrome here. We have a lot of indigenous knowledge, as Lisa pointed out. We have a lot of indigenous foods, and people know how to handle those foods from decades, from ancestors. And so how do we integrate that knowledge into the system and make those people part of the solution? It cannot be a top-down approach. It cannot be, I'm the regulator, I'm telling you this is how it's going to be. It can no longer be that. It has to be the bottom-up collaboration approach. That's the only way we're going to get buy-in and have this work.
Yeah, that leads me on. Actually, the second question was really about that I was going to ask was about, how do you see the top-down versus the bottom-up, and what's your feeling about, the balance between those two? Again, Lisa, I might start with you there.
I think it's not about bottoms and tops. It's holistic. It's the 360. We always say food safety is everyone's responsibility, and it is about partnerships. Industry needs to come on board because that unsafe food finds its way into communities and societies, and it reflects on all of us. We are here to not only produce safe food, but prepare it and serve it to our communities. And it's a basic human right to have safe food. And it's all of our responsibilities. And I want to highlight one of our food security pillars, which we are talking about more and more, and that's food agency. And food agency is really your right to decide on that production, what you're going to buy and eat. And, so the importance of sharing information around what is nutritious, safe, healthy food, and how communities can engage, and how industry and scientists and all of us can support safe food for all.
That's a new term now, food agency. I haven't come across that. I really like that idea of giving people agency about the food that they consume. Lucia, though, same question to you, maybe elaborating a little bit more on the top-down, bottom-up. I know there was a lot of controversy on the last session that was in this room about that, but maybe you'd like to provide a bit more perspective.
Well, as I said, I think it's important that we get the collaboration of all the different groups that are involved in this discussion as to how we take this, how do we take food safety forward in South Africa. And I'm speaking to South Africa, even though I'm on the advisory panel of the African Union. But let's start with home first, and let's see how we can then assist with what we're learning and take it through to the African Union concept of their food safety agency, that their authority, actually, the FSA, that they're trying to set up. But certainly, if you look at their food safety strategy that we published in 2022, I was part of that process, thankfully, because it gave me a lot of insight into the other challenges that other African countries are facing that are not the same as South Africa, because we have this formal food sector which is so well developed, which we don't see in the rest of the African countries. So we have a slightly different situation, as I mentioned. And that is why it's absolutely critical that we do not ignore this informal sector. They have an understanding, they have a knowledge base that we haven't tapped into adequately enough. And we need to bring those people on board.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point about the other African countries. USAID did a fantastic piece of work. I don't know if you've seen it, actually looking across some other countries like Zambia and some of the needs there. And you're right, it's a lot more akin to the informal sector in South Africa, and I do think there's an opportunity there. So we have about 10 minutes actually for questions from the floor. I have a couple of other things I've been scribbling down if the audience are super quiet, but if we have a roving mic or two, we'll happily take some questions from the floor. I've got blinding lights, so you might have to wave, and there is a hand. So could we get a mic to the girl that's just, to the person actually, who's just near the camera? We got a mic? If not, we're gonna, there we go. And maybe you just identify yourself, please, as well.
Louise Abayami, Natural Resources Institute, University of Greenwich. Thanks for the great presentation. You're absolutely right with everything you say. I'm based in Nigeria, by the way, and we have some serious issues. I have a PhD student working in urban slums, so in Lagos. It's a lot more dire than South Africa because there isn't any potable water, for example, in those slums. I'm just thinking maybe if you take the angle of recognizing the importance of those informal communities to the economy, and maybe use that angle, because unless you do, no one really cares about whether they're getting foodborne diseases or not, as sad as it may be. But maybe if you look at that angle, that might help to drive interest and so on. Just a comment, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I was actually staggered. I think one of you had it on your slides about the scale in the billions, actually, that this is worth to South Africa. 25 US billion, was it?
That's right, about
really
25
sizable.
billion.
But I think that's a great point. Sometimes, measuring it in other terms, including economics, can really help. Thank you for the comment. Another question over here. There's a table near the pillar. I think there's a mic coming from behind. There we go. Thank you. And
I want to first thank the two presenters. I'm Betty Fang from Purdue University in the US. So I know that it's been very, very challenging even for the US extension system. We have a land-grant university, we have extension, so we have the prejudice to have a system try to reach out to the community to learn more about food safety. However, when I listened to your presentation about the situations in South Africa, I was thinking who can we reach out to really share the information in the community? Do universities or the healthcare professionals collaborate with you, or is there any strategic plan already there, or is there anything that is developing? Thank you.
maybe Lisa, do you want to take that? I see you nodding enthusiastically.
Yeah, that's a good question, because we do have access to the whole educational system. And if you look at our educational system, we currently have a school feeding program where we are not only growing vegetables at the schools, and we're also feeding the students using some of those vegetables. We also bring food in. It's a whole framework. 9 million children we are feeding through that scheme. That should be your access to changing a whole community in terms of bringing the education to them, in terms of how to handle food, how to take responsibility for safe food, good preparation methods, hygiene and sanitation. So we have a tool. We need to use it. We have tried. We've done a study where we compared schools in South Africa, the food safety knowledge. And it was interesting because the Department of Education had an extensive training program for food handlers in their school feeding program. And then we accessed different countries in the continent, and we looked at the school feeding program throughout Africa. And there's several classic examples. So we can work through our educational system. That's the one thing. And the second very important example is look at COVID. COVID was incredible. We suddenly got everyone washing their hands, even little children. Everyone was disinfecting, and it became the norm. So we've done it before, we can do it again.
Would you like to build on that?
Yeah, please. Thank you for the question because it's such a good one and it feeds directly into what we are aiming to achieve at the summit this year. That's why an entire session, I've blocked an entire morning for that. And we're going to have this panel discussion, is bringing together the different role players to see how do we take not only the food safety concept forward, but also the training, the awareness. And industry has a very big role to play there. And a lot of the